The morning began with silence so deep it felt alive, a silence that moved with the wind, curling through the gullies and ridgelines of the New Mexico desert. It carried the taste of dust, of sun-baked rock, of sagebrush just touched by dawn. Every sound, every whisper of air, every scrape of grit under a boot seemed to belong to the earth itself. Jackson Wade moved through that silence like a ghost carved from stone. 15 years of frontier sun had burned his skin into the color of red earth. His shoulders bore the shape of long labor, and his eyes, cold, deliberate, endlessly searching, had learned not to blink when the horizon shimmered with heat. He rode without hurry. The mule beneath him plodded along a dry creek bed, its breath rising in soft clouds of dust. The rifle across Wade's saddle gleamed faintly, not from care, but from wear. Each scratch told a story, each dent a moment survived. The canyon opened wide before him, its walls painted in the colors of blood and ash. Rusted reds bled into pale grays, the stone cracked and layered like the memory of time itself. Somewhere above, a hawk traced the same slow spiral he'd been riding for hours, a hunter watching another hunter. The air was already warming, heavy with that peculiar stillness that comes before the true heat of day. He could feel it on the back of his neck, the promise of the desert's punishment. It was the kind of heat that found a man's bones, stripped him clean of thought, and left only instinct behind. Wade welcomed it. He had long since stopped fighting what this land demanded. The frontier taught its lessons through pain, and he'd learned every one of them by heart. He was hunting, not for game, not for gold, but for quiet, a kind of quiet that could outlast the noise in his own head. That noise had been there for 15 years. The echo of a child's laughter, the way it once filled a cabin now long gone. It was the sound that haunted him most, a sound that no bullet, no whiskey, no prayer had ever silenced. The trail wound deeper into the canyon, narrowing to a spine of rock. Loose stones clattered beneath the mule's hooves. The canyon walls closed in, red and jagged, as if the earth itself was drawing him into its throat. Wade adjusted his hat against the glare and listened, always listening. He heard the hiss of wind along the cliff, the far-off rattle of something small and coiled, and beneath it all, the faint, unnatural tremor of movement, a sound that did not belong. He halted the mule, let the silence settle. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of iron and something burnt. It was faint, but it struck him like memory, blood and smoke, old as war. His hand went to the rifle without thought, not from fear, but habit. He dismounted slowly, boots meeting the dust with a soft thud that broke the stillness. The canyon seemed to breathe around him, its shadows alive and waiting. He scanned the ledges, the rocks, the bends of the dry wash. Nothing, only the shimmer of heat rising off stone, but the smell remained, metallic, sharp, undeniable. The smell of something that once lived and no longer did. A vulture circled above, lazy and patient. Its wings cut across the sun, casting slow-moving shadows across the ground. Wade followed that shadow with his eyes until he saw it, far down the gully, half buried in dust and brush, something pale, something human-shaped. The mule snorted, uneasy. Wade walked forward, rifle low, boots crunching through grit. Each step stirred ghosts of dust into the air, little veils that caught the sunlight like smoke. He approached the thing slowly, each movement deliberate, the way he had once moved through enemy trenches where the ground could hide more than bones. The closer he came, the clearer it became, a figure, sprawled, unmoving, a body baked by sun and time. Leather straps, remnants of cloth, hair tangled with sand, and around the neck, faint but gleaming, a small silver chain. It caught the light like a blade, something in his chest twisted, sharp and cold. He knelt beside the remains, brushing away the dust with careful fingers. The chain moved with the faintest sound, a whisper of metal against bone. A pendant hung from it, a shape he knew too well, a small worn charm with the engraving of a lily. The air left his lungs. The world seemed to still. For a long, silent moment, the canyon and the man were one, both hollowed out by loss. He told himself it couldn't be. The desert had a way of tricking the eyes, of echoing old pain in new shapes. But the sight of that charm, identical to the one he had given a laughing girl 15 years ago, tore open a wound he had buried beneath years of dust and duty. Wade's fingers trembled as he closed them around the pendant. The metal burned against his skin, hot from the sun, or from something deeper. A memory, long suppressed, surged up through the years, the sound of laughter again, the flash of blonde hair in the sunlight, the small voice that once called his name with trust, with joy. He felt the old guilt rise thick and choking. He had left her to a world crueler than she deserved. And now, in this empty canyon, the earth itself seemed to remind him of that choice. He stayed there for what felt like hours. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon into a furnace. Sweat, mixed with dust, streaking down his face like pale mud. The scent of sagebrush and blood tangled in the heat, a cruel perfume of memory and decay. Then, movement. Far ahead, near a break in the rock, a shape small and fleeting, someone alive. He rose, heart pounding against the years of silence, the silver chain still clutched in his hand. The desert had stirred something he thought long dead. And whatever moved in that canyon, whatever hand of fate had drawn him here, would not let him rest until the truth burned clear as the noon sun. The shadow slipped behind the rocks, swift and deliberate, a flicker of movement, gone as soon as he fixed his gaze. Wade stood motionless. Only the wind dared move, stirring fine threads of dust around his boots. The silver charm pressed against his palm, the metal hot as guilt. It anchored him to the moment, to the truth he did not want. His breath came slow, uneven, as if the canyon itself drew it from him. He told himself the figure ahead might be nothing, a trick of light, a wandering soul, a mirage cast by grief. But the land rarely lied, it only revealed. He mounted again. The mule shifted under him, reluctant yet obedient, its hide shimmering with sweat. He turned toward the slope where the shape had vanished. The trail was faint, a scatter of loose gravel, a smear of displaced sand, enough to tell him someone had passed. Recently. The heat deepened as the sun climbed higher. Every surface glared back with merciless brilliance. The rocks shimmered like hammered copper. Air itself seemed to quiver, a veil between worlds, ready to melt away. Each breath tasted of metal and salt. His throat burned dry. He rode on. Hours dissolved into sameness. Stone, wind, the rhythmic creak of saddle leather. Sometimes he thought he could hear the whisper of water, faint and teasing, but it was only wind through split rock. The canyon offered no mercy. Even time bowed to its silence. He found the first sign near midday, a footprint half filled with sand, small, bare, pressed deep as though from exhaustion. He stared at it for a long while. Then another appeared, faint but certain, leading toward the darker heart of the canyon where the sun could not reach. He followed. Each step echoed with memory. He remembered chasing tracks once before. A lost child through rain and thunder, his voice raw from shouting her name into storm. Now he chased silence. And the silence felt heavier. The path narrowed again, funneled between two cliffs that leaned inward like the ribs of a giant beast. The air cooled. He could smell moisture, faint but real, the promise of a spring or hidden pool. Sweat chilled on his neck. The sound of his mule's breathing filled the hollow like slow thunder. A sudden gust scattered dust across the passage. Something clattered, a pebble, dislodged above. He froze, eyes lifted. A figure moved along the ridge, too distant for detail but small, slight, unsteady. the outline of long hair caught in the wind, then gone again. He waited until the echoes faded. The ridge quieted, save for the buzz of unseen flies. When he moved again, his thoughts sharpened, not hope, not fear, but the hard calm of a soldier returning to familiar ground. If someone still walked this canyon, they were half ghost already. The sun would finish what the years began. He reached the pool by late afternoon. A pocket of still water gathered at the base of stone, shaded by overhangs, blackened from age. He let the mule drink first. Then he knelt, scooping handfuls to his mouth. The taste was bitter, some minerals and decay, yet it cut through the dryness, a temporary mercy. As he drank, his eyes caught something caught among the reeds. Fabric, faded blue, torn, stiff with dust. He drew it free. The weave was delicate, almost gone to threads, but he recognized the stitching, small, uneven, the work of a young hand once learning. He could see her fingers again, small, patient, proud of each imperfect line. The cloth might have been anything once, a ribbon, a sleeve, a scrap from a child's dress. He closed his eyes. 15 years folded in upon themselves. He could feel that day again, the smoke, the gunfire, the unbearable stillness after. The way he had left everything behind except his guilt. He thought he had buried her with that decision, but the land, it seemed, had kept its own record. A vulture called above, low, guttural, mocking. He opened his eyes to the sky. The sun was lowering now, bleeding its light through the canyon's mouth. Evening approached with a promise of cold. He gathered the torn fabric, folded it carefully, and placed it inside his coat beside the pendant. 2 relics, 2 ghosts. The wind changed. It came from deeper within the gorge, carrying a new scent, faint smoke mixed with sage, human fire. Someone lived out there, or tried to. He led the mule onward, boots sliding on the rock. The canyon floor widened, revealing traces of old campfires and broken bones. He counted 3, maybe 4 sites, none recent, none abandoned willingly. Ash clung to the stone like fingerprints. He touched it, felt the cold grit smear beneath his thumb. It told a story of hunger, of endurance, of someone too stubborn to die. As dusk fell, he reached a rise overlooking a valley split by dry riverbed. The last light struck the far wall, revealing the faint curl of smoke rising from behind a line of boulders. He watched without moving. The mule shivered. Something in that smoke carried a message, the same pull that had drawn him here. He thought again of the figure on the ridge, small, barefoot, quick. Whoever she was, she carried his past like a shadow, and he could not turn away now. The desert had chosen the path, and his life had already been spent in walking it. He waited for full dark. The stars came first as sparks, then as wounds of light scattered across the sky. Coyotes began their long song, filling the emptiness with hunger and memory. He sat against the rock, letting the night settle around him. The canyon cooled, breathing slowly, as if asleep. Wade closed his eyes, but the images would not rest. The charm, the fabric, the figure in the heat shimmer. They circled him like ghosts waiting for confession. When the first chill of night bit through his coat, he rose. The fire still burned faintly ahead, a trembling heartbeat in the dark. He moved toward it, silent, careful, each step chosen as though the earth itself might listen. The scent of smoke thickened, and beneath it, the faint, unmistakable rhythm of breath. Not his own. Someone was there. The hunt was over. The reckoning had begun. The night wrapped the canyon like a shroud. The stars burned sharp and countless above. Cold fire scattered across a sky so wide it felt endless. The desert's breath had turned from heat to frost. Every exhale left a small cloud that vanished before his eyes. Wade moved along the slope in silence. Boots found stone by memory. Hands brushed rock to feel its shape. He had done this before, too many times, stalking camps in darker places, under darker banners. Old instincts stirred, the kind that never died, only slept. The faint glow ahead pulsed against the walls, a small fire, dying slow, its smoke trailing thin into the night. It painted the stone with a wavering gold, revealing cracks like old scars. He paused behind a boulder, breathing through his nose, letting the scent tell him what his eyes could not. Ash, charred wood, faint sweetness, herbs burned for warmth or healing. And under it all, the unmistakable smell of human skin too long under the sun. He waited, counting heartbeats. Then he heard it, the whisper of movement, ragged and uneven. A body shifting close to the flames. A breath pulled through dry lips, shallow but alive. He edged closer, slow as dusk. When he reached the rim of the small hollow, he looked down. A figure lay curled beside the embers, young, thin, draped in a blanket of torn hides. The firelight caught the edge of hair, tangled, dark, streaked with the pale dust of the desert, hands blistered, wrists bound by rope now frayed and cracked from struggle. One arm twitched weakly against the earth, reaching for the fading warmth. Wade felt his stomach tighten. The sun law. He had seen it before, the punishment reserved for thieves, deserters, the condemned. Left under the open sky for 3 days and nights, tied and forgotten until the sun burned mercy into their flesh. He knelt, studying her. The skin at her shoulders was raw, peeled by heat. The lips, split and caked with blood, moved as though speaking to something unseen. Her eyes fluttered beneath lashes rimmed with dust. He could almost hear the sound of her voice, not the words, just the plea carried in their rhythm. The desert had turned her whisper into wind. He stared longer than he meant to, something about the curve of her face, the defiance still clinging to her even in ruin, carved through his composure. He should have left her. The law of this land was survival, not mercy. But the chain in his pocket burned like truth. He reached forward, testing the rope. The fibers cracked under his touch, stiff and dry. They had held fast through heat and struggle, biting deep into swollen wrists. When he loosened the first knot, the sound of it breaking was sharp, final, like the snap of old vows. She stirred, a tremor more than motion. Her breath hitched, then steadied, shallow but stubborn. The scent of her wounds filled the air. Blood mixed with the dry tang of sweat and sand. He worked in silence, loosening each knot with careful hands. Every pull of rope brought a hiss of pain from her body, soft and half-conscious. He did not stop. When the last cord fell away, he wrapped her wrists in a strip torn from his coat. The cloth darkened quickly with blood. He felt the pulse beneath his fingers, weak, but still there, beating against the odds. The fire cracked once, throwing sparks that danced like stars caught in wind. He looked around the hollow. No horses, no other signs of life. Whoever had left her here had done so with intention. The desert was their executioner. He poured water from his canteen, a trickle onto her lips. Her throat moved, reflex searching for life. She swallowed what little she could, then fell still again. The sound she made after, a faint hum, like a broken tune remembered by a fevered mind, crawled through him. He lifted her carefully, the weight lighter than it should have been. Bones and dust, bound by stubborn breath. The movement drew a faint sigh from her, not relief, just release. He set her across the mule's back, securing her with strips of rope soft enough not to cut. The night watched in silence as he mounted. The fire behind him collapsed inward, sending a ghost of smoke into the sky. He turned toward the east, where the horizon had begun to pale. The first thread of dawn waited there, thin and uncertain. Each step of the mule echoed against the canyon walls, hollow, steady, like the slow beat of a drum leading them out of death's reach. The air smelled of cold stone and faint sage. He could hear her breathing behind him, fragile but constant, a rhythm that tethered him to something older than memory. As they rode, the land changed. The canyon opened to a field of scattered mesquite and thorn. Shadows stretched long and thin. The stars faded one by one, until only the morning star remained, bright, unyielding, watching. He thought of the war again. The nights spent carrying the wounded, the silence that followed every scream. This was no different, only the battlefield had changed. The enemy now was time, sun, and guilt. He remembered the charm, the small silver lily. He reached into his pocket, feeling its edge press against his palm. It seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the faint heartbeat behind him. Coincidence, maybe, or the desert playing tricks again. When dawn finally broke, light spilled across the plains like fire. The girl stirred once more, her body instinctively turning from it. He could see the burns glistening where the ropes had rubbed raw. He covered her with his coat. The wind caught its edges, fluttering it like a flag of surrender. He whispered nothing. There was nothing left to say that words could carry. Only the steady motion forward, the rising sun, and the weight of a life not yet lost. By mid-morning they reached the high ridge overlooking Swift River Basin. Below lay a scatter of cottonwoods and a dry stream bed winding through stone. Water waited there, hidden beneath sand, if one knew where to dig. He would make camp there, away from eyes, away from law. The mule descended slow, careful. Each step slid through loose shale, sending tiny avalanches whispering down the slope. When they reached the bottom, Wade eased the girl to the ground beneath the shade of a twisted tree. She did not wake, but her chest rose and fell, faint and sure. He knelt beside her, brushing dust from her hair. The strands clung to his fingers, fine as spider silk, streaked with sun-bleached gold beneath the grime. It struck him then, the resemblance not exact, but close enough to hurt. The years had changed memory, softened edges, but the echo was still there. The desert had brought him to her, or to what remained of her story. He sat back, listening to the wind move through the branches. It sounded almost like breathing. The sun climbed higher, spilling light through the leaves, turning the ground into shifting patterns of gold and shadow. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting exhaustion blur the line between now and then. The desert whispered nothing, yet everything it held pressed down upon him, the weight of choice, of blood, of time. He felt it settle into his bones, heavy as the day ahead. When he opened his eyes, the girl's pulse still beat under his hand, small but steady. He would keep it so, for as long as this harsh land allowed. The sun returned with vengeance. It rose slow, deliberate, as though determined to erase the mercy of night. Light spread across the basin, pale at first, then gold, then white. A fierce, blinding heat that turned every shadow into refuge. Wade woke before full dawn, the instinct of old campaigns still woven into his blood. The fire he had kindled in the night was nothing more than faint smoke and grey ash. The air already shimmered, though the day had barely begun. He checked the girl first. Her breathing was thin but even. Sweat gleamed on her forehead, beads of salt clinging to cracked skin. He touched her wrist. The pulse beat weak but stubborn, a life fighting for its own right to stay. The rope burns along her arms had turned dark and swollen. He cleaned them with water, every motion careful, slow, precise. She stirred once, a flinch, a whisper of pain without sound. He stopped, waited, continued. The desert stretched endless around them. No bird called, even the wind held its breath. The world was nothing but stone, light, and heat waiting to rise. He worked in silence. From his saddlebag, he tore strips of cloth, bound them around her wrists, then covered her eyes with the brim of his hat to spare them from the sun. He lifted her again to the mule's back, wrapped her in the remains of his coat. Then he rose, steadying himself with a deep breath drawn through the dust. The climb eastward began. Each step of the mule sent small plumes of grit into the air. The ground shimmered, softening at the edges, turning distance into illusion. Wade's boots crunched rhythmically, the only sound between the heat waves. By mid-morning, the heat grew thick enough to feel like weight. It pressed against his chest, burned at his neck, turned every breath into labor. Sweat traced rivers through the dust on his face. The mule's hide glistened, its breathing came hard and uneven. He stopped often, not from weakness but calculation. In the desert, haste killed quicker than bullets. He rationed his water, 2 small swallows at a time, no more. The girl received more. He poured the liquid slowly over her lips, watching her throat move with effort, the instinct of survival refusing to yield. The hours stretched into something endless. Light became its own sound, a low, humming roar that filled the skull and hollowed the mind. He drifted between thought and memory, between this burning world and the ghost of another. He remembered battlefields where the ground smoked and men lay still beneath the same merciless sky. He remembered the letter that had never been answered, the one he had written to a wife who had stopped waiting long before he came home. He remembered his daughter's eyes, bright, curious, full of questions he had never found the courage to answer. And he remembered the silence that followed when both were gone. The desert accepted such men without question. It did not forgive, but it understood. By afternoon they reached the edge of a dry plateau. Below, the land broke apart into a maze of gullies and stone arches. He found a small hollow beneath an overhang and led the mule inside. Shade cooled the air by precious degrees. The mule sighed, lowering its head. The girl remained still. He unpacked what little he carried, a blanket, half a loaf of hard bread, a flask nearly empty. He gave her water again, then pressed a damp cloth against her lips. The reaction was faint but present. Her hand twitched toward his, a reflex born of thirst and pain. He watched, silent, as her fingers fell back to stillness. He rested then, sitting with his back against the stone, rifle across his knees. The rock behind him pulsed with heat, gathered through the morning, radiating slow through his spine. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of the land, steady, exhausted, unending. Outside, the light shifted from gold to white, to the first tint of red. He could feel time bleeding through him, each hour a weight added to the chain of years he already carried. Yet in the stillness, a strange calm settled. The kind that comes when a man has run out of anger and found only purpose left. He looked at her again. The burns along her neck had blistered. He tore more cloth, dipped it in water, laid it gently across the wounds. Steam rose as the heat of her skin met the coolness. The smell of blood and sweat and dust filled the small hollow. He did not turn away. When the light began to fade, he stepped out from the shade. The desert glowed, red stone burning like embers, sky deepening toward violet. The wind returned, low and mournful, sweeping through the gullies with a sound like memory. He watched it move, watched how the light changed every surface, how the shadow crept and withdrew, how the earth seemed to breathe again after holding still through the long hours. This was the hour he loved most, the moment when day surrendered and the world became honest again. He turned back. The girl's chest still rose and fell. Her face looked softer now in the half-light, less like a stranger, more like a story unfinished. He sat beside her until the stars began to bloom overhead. Somewhere far off, a wolf called. Long, distant, a sound that trembled across the stone. It carried through the basin, haunting but beautiful, the sound of a creature who had made peace with its hunger. Wade listened until it faded, leaving only the soft pulse of wind. He closed his eyes, but sleep would not come. The heat had burned the world clean of dreams. He thought of the pendant again, the lily glinting faintly in the dying light. He reached for it, feeling its cold edge against his skin. He wondered how many miles it had traveled, how many hands had touched it, how much pain it had gathered before finding its way back to him. The stars above turned slow, the night deepened, and somewhere, just before dawn, he made a quiet promise, not to any god, not even to her, but to the dust itself, that he would see this through. Whatever truth waited at the end of this trail, he would face it, even if it broke him again. The first wind of dawn moved across the basin, thin and cold. It slid through the mesquite and whispered over the rocks, stirring the ash of last night's fire. The world was still half asleep, wrapped in that pale hour between darkness and heat. Wade rose slowly, bones creaking like the timbers of an old barn. The mule lifted its head, ears twitching toward the coming light. A faint glimmer traced the eastern ridge, the edge of another day that would burn the ground clean again. He knelt beside the girl. Her breathing was deeper now, her skin damp with fever. A pulse beat at her neck, stronger than yesterday. He let his hand rest there for a moment, feeling the fragile rhythm of defiance. They needed water. The small flask was nearly empty, its sound, when shaken, the hollow rattle of survival, running thin. He looked toward the dry wash stretching south, remembering the lay of the land, a trickle of hidden springs that only showed themselves where the cottonwoods grew. If the roots could find it, so could he. He saddled the mule, careful not to jostle the wounded body draped across a blanket. The girl stirred once, murmuring a sound too soft to shape into meaning. He steadied her, tightening the rope that held her secure. Then he began the walk. The sun rose fast. Light spilled over the cliffs, cold at first, then fierce, sharpening every shadow. Dust rose from each step, settling on his boots, his coat, his skin, fine as ash, clinging like memory. He followed the shape of the land, reading it as another might read scripture. Every bend of stone, every bend of scrub told him where the old river once ran. He listened for the hollow tone beneath his steps, the sound of sand over hidden moisture. By mid-morning the heat had thickened again. Air quivered, turning the distance into a wavering mirage. The mule's breath grew loud, its flanks heaving. Wade pressed onward, tracing the faint line of animal tracks that converged toward a shallow depression between two red hills. When he reached it, the ground felt different, cooler beneath the surface dust. He knelt, digging with his hands, scooping away layer after layer until his fingers struck dampness. A dark patch spread under his touch. He dug faster, deeper, until water pooled, thin, cloudy, but real. He cupped it in his palms, letting it run down his wrists, savoring the shock of cool against burned skin. Then he filled his canteen, soaked a strip of cloth, and carried it back to the girl. Her lips were cracked, her tongue swollen. He dripped the water slowly between them, drop by drop. Her throat moved. Her chest rose, steadied. When he wiped her face with the damp cloth, the dust came away in streaks, revealing skin not yet lost to the sun's cruelty. She was younger than he had thought, too young to bear the scars she carried. A child when the desert first claimed her, perhaps. A survivor now only by spite. He poured water over her wrists, letting it run down into the bindings of cloth. The smell of heat-baked wounds lifted into the air, sharp and bitter. He forced himself not to look away. The mule drank greedily from the small hollow he had dug. The sound of it, the lapping, the low grunt of relief, filled the silence like music. For a moment the world seemed softer. Even the wind eased. He sat back, letting the sun dry the mud on his hands. His mind wandered, as it always did when stillness allowed. He thought of the old ranch, the fence posts bleached white by time, the laughter that once echoed between them. He remembered teaching a small girl how to set a trap, how to tell rabbit tracks from fox. He could still see her face in the lantern light, wide-eyed, proud, the little silver pendant catching each spark of flame. The image struck too deep. He felt it twist inside him, guilt, memory, longing, all the colors of regret. He clenched his hands in the sand until the feeling dulled. When he opened his eyes again, the desert shimmered as if alive. Heat waves rolled over the plain like unseen creatures. The scent of sage thickened in the air. He thought he heard water moving underground, a faint murmuring sound, rhythmic, patient, a buried river, hidden yet eternal. He took it as a sign. The desert was never generous, but it whispered truth to those who listened. This place, this hidden stream, would hold them for a time. He built a shelter of brush and stone, small but enough to cast shadow. The girl he laid within, covering her with his blanket. He rubbed the mule's legs with sand to cool them, then stood watching the horizon. The sky had turned a hard white, merciless. In the far distance, heat blurred the mountains into ghosts. The air tasted of salt and iron. He could feel his heartbeat slow, heavy with exhaustion, yet steady with purpose. By afternoon, her fever broke. Sweat glistened on her skin. Her breathing eased. She turned her head slightly, eyes still closed, as though listening to something only she could hear. The faintest smile, or perhaps a grimace, touched her lips before fading. Wade watched, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. He waited through the long hours of light until the sky began to dim. The sun sank behind the western ridge, throwing the basin into red fire, then purple shadow. Wind rose again, carrying the scent of cooling stone. When the first stars appeared, he allowed himself a mouthful of bread and a slow drink of water. He sat near her, sharpening his knife against a piece of flint, not for need, but for sound, for rhythm, for company. The scrape echoed softly in the hollow. It was the sound of continuity, of something human enduring against the vast indifference around them. He looked once more at the sleeping girl. Her chest rose and fell in a gentler rhythm now, almost peaceful. The moon climbed high, painting the basin silver. Wade felt the fatigue settle deep in his bones. He whispered nothing to the night. It had heard enough from men like him. Instead, he leaned back against the stone, eyes half closed, listening to the buried river move unseen beneath the sand, steady, eternal, alive. And somewhere in that quiet pulse of water and wind, he felt the first thread of hope in 15 long years. The morning came without mercy. The first light struck the rocks like fire, cutting sharp edges into the world. The air had no coolness left in it, only the dry weight of a sun that promised to punish every living thing that dared to move. Wade rose before the light fully touched the camp. His body felt carved from the same stone he leaned against. Sleep had offered no comfort, only a slower kind of fatigue. He poured the last of the water over his hands, let it trickle down his face, and breathed the taste of iron and dust. The girl still slept. Her face was pale beneath the crusted dirt, lips barely moving with each breath. The fever was gone, but weakness had taken its place. Her hands twitched from time to time, the faint unconscious reflex of someone whose mind wandered in places darker than dreams. Wade studied the horizon. He could feel it before he could see it, the sense that something had changed. The stillness was too complete, no wind, no distant cry of a hawk. Even the mule stood motionless, ears pricked, nostrils wide. He moved toward the ridge, slow and careful. Each step pressed into the dust, leaving a story behind. When he reached the crest, he stopped and scanned the basin beyond. Then he saw them, faint but undeniable. Tracks, 3 sets, fresh. The pattern told him enough. 2 riders, 1 pack animal, moving northeast. Not military, not local settlers. The spacing was wrong, too deliberate, too quiet. Men who knew how to move unseen. He crouched beside the tracks, tracing the edges with a fingertip. The sun had not yet hardened the prints. They had passed within the last few hours. He could almost feel their weight, the rhythm of hooves, the grind of boots, the tension of eyes searching the horizon. They were hunting, not for food, for someone. He felt the knowledge settle deep in his gut, the same kind of certainty that a soldier feels before an ambush. He didn't need to see their faces to know the type, men of bounty or worse. He turned back toward camp, his mind already calculating. He had to move before the heat rose too high. He couldn't leave the girl, not now, not with the desert still breathing against her wounds. But staying meant discovery, and discovery meant death. The choice carved itself cleanly in his mind, the way a knife cuts through sinew. He began to pack. He moved quietly, every sound measured. The cinch of a strap, the dull clink of metal, the soft grunt of the mule. Each noise felt too loud in the still morning. He lifted the girl carefully, wrapping her in the blanket. Her body felt light, fragile, as though she might vanish if held too tightly. He placed her across the saddle, securing her weight against the curve of the mule's neck. She stirred, half-conscious, a breath escaping her that carried no words, only weariness. The sun climbed higher. By the time they moved out, the sky was a hard white glare. Every surface shimmered. The air itself seemed to hum with heat. He steered away from the open basin, cutting toward the shadow of the cliffs. There the wind funneled through narrow passes, carrying a faint coolness and the smell of rock dust. He followed a game trail that wound along the canyon's edge, hidden from above. Each sound became amplified, the scrape of hooves against stone, the rhythmic creak of leather, the beating of his own heart. He listened for anything that didn't belong. A rock shifted far behind. A faint metallic rattle drifted on the wind. He froze. He waited. The silence stretched. Then came the distant sound, faint, deliberate, the echo of horses descending through gravel. They were following. He turned the mule into the canyon, urging it onward with a soft touch. The walls rose around them, red and gold, painted by centuries of sun and wind. It was beautiful and dangerous. Sound carried strangely here. Footsteps doubled, whispers turned to ghosts. He moved quickly but not carelessly. Every bend in the path offered a new choice, to vanish deeper or to risk the open plain ahead. He chose the deeper way, where the shadows grew longer and the air cooled. The canyon narrowed to a slot, wide enough for one rider at a time. He stopped near a pile of fallen rock and dismounted. The girl's breathing was shallow now, steady, but faint. He hid her and the mule behind the stone and crouched at the entrance, studying the ground. Dust drifted lazily through the light. Then, a faint tremor. Hooves again. Closer. He steadied his breath. The rhythm of old instincts returned, the way it had been in the war, the way it would always be. No hesitation, only observation, timing, silence. The first rider appeared on the ridge above, silhouetted by sun. Wade could see the shimmer of a rifle barrel, the glint of a buckle. The man paused, scanning the canyon, eyes narrowing against the glare. Then he moved on, unaware of what waited below. The second rider followed, keeping distance, cautious, professional, the kind that lived by patience, the kind that could wait days to find what they wanted. Wade stayed still until both vanished beyond the next rise. Then he exhaled, slow and deep. He waited longer still, counting heartbeats, listening for any trick of echo or deception. When the world finally returned to quiet, he gathered the reins and stepped back to the girl. Her eyes were half open now. She looked at him without focus, her mind still caught between fever and waking. He could see confusion there, and something else. Recognition. A flicker, faint as starlight. He paused, struck by that look. It hit him harder than he expected. For a moment he forgot the tracks, the riders, the heat. All he could see was the curve of her face, the shape of the small silver pendant at her throat, a trinket once given long ago when the world had been softer. His pulse quickened. His breath caught. No, it couldn't be. The desert played cruel tricks. Still, he reached out, brushing away the dust from the pendant. The design was faint, worn by time, but unmistakable. A tiny engraving of a flower, a forget-me-not. He felt his chest tighten, as though the sun itself had reached inside him. Every sound fell away, the wind, the insects, even the breath of the mule. There was only that single truth shining against her skin. The past he had buried 15 years ago was not gone. It was breathing again, lying in his arms. The light changed as the sun slid west. Long shadows stretched across the canyon floor, cool bands between red stone. The wind carried a thin smell of sage and iron, a scent that always came before nightfall in this country. Wade knelt beside her once more. The pendant still rested against her throat, glinting with the last gold of the sun. That small shimmer pulled him backward through time, to the porch of a weather-beaten house, to a little girl laughing as she traced that same engraving with curious fingers. The sound of that laughter lived inside him still, though the years had buried it beneath dust and war and silence. He closed his eyes. 15 years of searching had turned the memory brittle, fragile as bone left in the sun. He had told himself she was gone, taken by flood, by accident, by fate, yet now the same design, the same tiny imperfection in the metal where the craftsman's tool had slipped. Coincidence could not explain that. His pulse hammered. It felt wrong, impossible, cruel. The desert could make a man see ghosts in drifting sand. Maybe this was another trick, a mirage not of water but of hope. He looked closer. Her face, though gaunt from hunger, carried echoes of what he remembered. The line of the jaw, the faint dimple in the left cheek that appeared even in sleep. Time had changed everything else. The child was gone. The survivor remained. He sat back, staring at the canyon wall as the sun fell behind it. The color of the rock deepened from blood red to rust, then to shadow. His thoughts tangled. If she was truly the one he had lost, then all the years of guilt, the endless wandering, the fights, the bottle, the half-lived days, all of it had led to this single moment. If she was not, then he was a fool, staring at a stranger while the hunters closed in. He pressed his hands against his face, feeling the grit grind into his skin. The earth itself seemed to hum beneath him. The same buried river he had heard the night before, moving somewhere deep under the sand. It reminded him that life always continued, even when men broke under its weight. The girl stirred. A faint breath escaped her, uneven but alive. Her eyes opened halfway, cloudy, unfocused. She seemed to search the air, as if listening for something beyond hearing. Her lips moved, forming shapes without sound. Wade leaned closer, though no words came. He caught only the rhythm of breath, the tremor of exhaustion. It didn't matter what she tried to say. What mattered was that she lived. He soaked another cloth in the last of the cool water and laid it against her forehead. Her skin twitched at the touch, then relaxed. Night fell quickly. The stars emerged one by one, pale at first, then burning clear. The canyon walls trapped the warmth of the day, releasing it slowly into the dark. Crickets began their low, steady pulse. The world exhaled. He built a small fire, shielding the flame behind a ring of stones. The glow painted her face in flickering amber. He studied her again, not as a soldier, not as a survivor, but as a man remembering what mercy felt like. The mind wanted certainty, the heart wanted belief. Between them stretched the silence of the desert. He thought of the years after she vanished, the river swollen by storm, the body never found, the endless nights replaying every decision he should have made. He had carried her absence like a brand across his soul. He had prayed for a sign, then cursed the heavens when none came, and now perhaps the sign lay breathing in front of him, battered, nameless, alive. The wind shifted, blowing sparks into the darkness. He watched them fade before they touched the ground. That was life here, brief flares of light swallowed by endless night. He lay back, eyes fixed on the stars. Each one seemed colder than he remembered. He wondered what kind of world she had seen since the river took her, what had shaped her hands into such scars, what had filled her eyes with that distant calm that only those who had suffered long could carry. The questions circled like vultures. No answers came, only the steady whisper of sand moving against stone. He reached again for the pendant, turning it between his fingers. The metal was warm from her skin. He could almost hear her child voice saying it was her lucky charm, a promise that it would always bring her home. The memory hit him with the force of a gunshot, sharp, final, echoing through years of silence. He closed his hand around the pendant and bowed his head. The fire crackled softly. The mule shifted in the dark. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried, a long, wavering note that carried both hunger and loneliness. He whispered nothing in reply. Words were useless in a place like this. He simply listened, breathing in the rhythm of the desert, letting its vast stillness settle over the chaos inside him. The night deepened. He stayed awake, guarding the small circle of light. Every so often he checked the trail above, watching for movement, for glint of metal, for shadow against starlight. None came. The hunters were still out there, but not yet near. He thought of what tomorrow would bring, the choice to move again, the endless ride towards safety, the fragile life he carried with him. He knew the desert would test them both. He also knew that if she truly was who he believed, then fate itself had delivered a second chance he did not deserve. The fire sank to embers. He covered them with sand, leaving only a faint orange pulse. Then he settled beside her, wrapped in the silence. The stars turned slowly overhead, and the buried river murmured beneath them like a secret kept by the earth. He let his eyes close at last, the pendant still in his hand, the past still heavy in his chest. Sleep took him not with rest, but with surrender. A long fall into the dark where memory and reality became the same. The first hint of dawn crept through the canyon, a faint grey light brushing the stone. The night's chill still clung to the air, but the promise of heat already lingered beneath it, patient and cruel. Wade stirred before the sun rose, his body attuned to the rhythm of survival. He moved silently, stirring the ashes of the fire, scattering what little warmth remained until it vanished into the dust. The girl still slept, her breath shallow but steady. The fever had eased, yet her strength had not returned. She was caught between worlds, the living and the lost, and he could only guard her while the desert decided which way she would fall. He scanned the canyon's mouth. The sand there was no longer smooth. Something had disturbed it during the night. At first, he thought it might have been wind. Then he saw the print, faint but sharp. A horseshoe mark. Fresh. He froze. His pulse tightened. There were more, overlapping, descending from the ridge like the steady beat of a drum. 3 riders again, the same pattern, the same quiet pursuit. He crouched low, tracing the edges with his fingertips. The dew had not yet burned off the stone. These tracks were made before dawn, perhaps an hour ago. They were closing in. He rose slowly, every sense sharp. The canyon offered both cover and trap. He knew it too well. The walls that hid them now could just as easily cage them later. He moved quickly, saddling the mule and securing the girl across it. Her body stirred faintly, head rolling against his shoulder, a soft sound of pain escaping her throat, not words, only the ghost of memory. He steadied her gently, adjusting the blanket to block the wind. The sun crested the horizon. Light flooded the canyon, washing everything in molten gold. The rocks came alive with color, red, orange, and black, a living fire of stone. Wade led the mule into that burning light, his figure small against the vastness. He followed the canyon's winding path, staying close to shadow where it lingered. Each step echoed softly, merging with the low moan of wind that swept through the narrows. He could not outrun mounted men in open country, but he could lose them in silence. Ahead, the canyon split, one path leading east toward open desert, the other bending north into the Badlands, a maze of broken stone and dead riverbeds. He chose north. The land there was cruel but secretive, full of blind corners and places where even the wind lost its way. By mid-morning, the heat grew fierce. The light pressed against him like a weight, making each breath feel heavier. Sweat ran into his eyes, tasting of salt and grit. The mule labored, its hooves slipping on shale, but it kept moving. He muttered no word of command, no plea, only walked, step by step, letting instinct guide him deeper into the maze. Every sound mattered now. The scrape of stone, the cry of a crow overhead, the faint clatter of pebbles disturbed by movement not his own. He stopped more than once, listening, reading the silence the way others might read a map. Each pause stretched long enough for the pulse of danger to beat clearly in his ears. Then it came, a distant echo, the rhythmic beat of hooves, 3 sets, steady, sure. The sound carried strangely through the canyons, twisting and bending. He couldn't tell if it came from ahead or behind. He pressed onward. The canyon walls grew closer, the air cooler. A raven passed overhead, its shadow sliding across the girl's still form. Her lips moved again, whispering nothing he could understand. Perhaps fragments of a life once lived. Perhaps the language of dreams. They reached a narrow ledge overlooking a dry ravine. Below lay a scatter of bones, cattle, deer, maybe men, picked clean by sun and scavengers. The air smelled faintly of decay. He turned aside, choosing a higher path along the ridge. By midday, the sound of pursuit faded, swallowed by wind and distance. Still he knew they would not stop. Men who followed this far did not turn back for heat or thirst. They followed until they caught what they wanted, or died in the attempt. He found a hollow between 2 boulders and led the mule inside. The shade there was thin, but enough to breathe in. He laid the girl down, checked her pulse, then leaned against the rock and closed his eyes briefly. His thoughts drifted between exhaustion and memory. He remembered the war, the smell of powder, the sound of bodies falling, the emptiness after victory. He remembered coming home to silence, to a house where laughter no longer lived. He remembered the search along the riverbank, the water swollen, the current too fast, and the pendant missing from its hook. That small gap in the world had swallowed everything. Now the pendant had returned, but what had it brought with it? Salvation or torment? He couldn't tell. He looked down at her again. Her breathing had grown shallower, yet her face looked peaceful, almost serene. The faintest flicker of a smile touched her lips. He felt something stir inside him. Not joy, but a quieter thing. Recognition. Perhaps even forgiveness. The wind shifted again. He caught a sound carried on it, faint, distant, metallic, a gun being cocked, then another. His heart slammed once against his ribs. He grabbed the mule's reins, pulling it silently deeper into the shadows. He pressed himself against the cool stone, breath shallow. The canyon beyond lay in sunlight, harsh, open, merciless. Then he saw them, 3 riders, black against the glare, moving slow, deliberate, scanning every rise and hollow. The first carried a rifle across his saddle. The second leaned forward, eyes sweeping the ground like a predator's. The third led a spare horse laden with packs. They said nothing, yet the air carried their intent, the hunger of men who hunted for more than coin. They stopped near the mouth of the ravine. One dismounted, crouching low, touching the sand. He found what he was looking for, a print, a sign of life. Wade's muscles tensed. He waited, unmoving. The mule stood still beside him, nostrils flaring. Even the girl, lost in fever's haze, seemed to sense the danger. The riders lingered for a long moment, then turned their mounts toward the north, toward the very maze he had entered. He knew then that time had run thin. Night would no longer protect them. The hunt was no longer distant. It had found their scent. The sun lowered behind the ridges, setting the rocks ablaze in crimson fire. Shadows lengthened, deep and sharp. He gathered what little they carried, water, a knife, a handful of dried bread, and readied to move again. The desert was patient, but the men who hunted were not. And somewhere beyond the next bend, The past waited for him, wearing the face of the living and the dead. The day burned itself to ruin. By the time the sun began to fall, the canyon's walls were red as open wounds. The air shimmered, thick, unbreathable, and every sound seemed distant, drowned in the hum of heat. Wade moved like a shadow through the ravine, his eyes fixed ahead. The mule stumbled often now, worn thin from thirst, but it still obeyed. Each step it took was a small act of faith. The girl's head hung low against its shoulder, her breath uneven. The fever had returned. He knew the place he sought was near, an old settlement long dead, known in whispers as the Burned Crossing. Once a river town, built on trade and ambition. Now, nothing but ash and silence. He had seen it years before, on a journey best forgotten, and remembered its ruins like the bones of a bad dream. The canyon widened into a dry plain, scattered with stumps and broken fences. Charred beams jutted from the sand like grave markers. Here and there, fragments of pottery gleamed among the rocks. The wind moved through, carrying faint echoes, not sound, but memory. He led the mule toward what remained of the main street. Blackened walls, a half-buried wagon. The skeleton of a windmill, its blades rusted and motionless. The place reeked of old fire and abandonment. He stopped beneath the windmill and listened. The world was still, too still. He crouched, touching the ground. Sand, dust, no tracks. Then, faintly, one single print, half hidden by debris. Fresh. Boot heel. Someone had passed through here recently. He scanned the horizon. No movement. Only the heavy glow of sunset pressing down like molten lead. He could feel it, the sense of being watched, of something unseen and patient. Predator. Or ghost. He guided the mule toward the remains of a stable at the town's edge. Inside, shadows clung thick as smoke. He tied the mule, gave it the last of their water, and lowered the girl gently to the ground. Her skin burned to the touch, fever pulsing like fire beneath it. He soaked a strip of cloth, pressed it to her forehead, then leaned back against the post. The silence of the place was suffocating. Every breath felt loud, every heartbeat echoed. He tried to rest, but memory would not sleep. It came crawling back, the flames, the screams, the smoke, curling up into the night. He remembered riding through this town when it burned. He had seen the people flee. He had heard the shots that ended them, and he had turned away, unable to stop what had already begun. Now he was back among the ghosts he'd once left behind. The desert had a cruel sense of humor. The wind shifted. A faint creak echoed through the ruins, wood bending under weight. Then another sound, a horse's snort. Soft, close. He rose silently, drawing his rifle, moved through the shadows, steps careful, measured, peered through the broken frame of the stable wall. Out in the street, the riders had arrived. 3 of them, dark against the dying light. Their silhouettes wavered in the heat's afterglow, faces hidden beneath wide brims. They dismounted without a word, moved slowly, methodically, like men who already knew what they were hunting. Wade's breath came shallow. He retreated deeper into the dark, keeping his steps silent. He could hear their boots crunching in the ash outside. Then the sound of a match striking, brief light flaring, illuminating one man's face for an instant, scarred, hollow-eyed. He lit a cigar and let the flame die. The smoke curled upward, ghostly in the dusk. They spread out, checking the ruins one by one. He could hear them talking in low tones, though the words were lost to distance. One of them whistled, short, sharp, a signal. Another answered from the far side of the street. They were sweeping the area, closing in. Wade's mind raced. He had little ammunition left, no food, no water, a half-dead girl and a tired mule. Running was useless. But silence could still save them. He crouched low beside her. Her eyes fluttered open briefly and glazed, unfocused. Her lips moved, forming a sound he could not hear. Then she slipped back into stillness. He pressed a finger to his lips, as if she could understand, then waited. The riders drew closer, boots scuffed against stone. Metal clicked. The faint smell of smoke reached him again. They were only yards away now. The light faded completely. Darkness fell across the ruins. The only glow came from the ember of that cigar, burning faintly red. One of the riders stopped beside the stable door, paused, listened. The silence was complete, so deep it roared. Then a sound, a single drop of water falling from the roof. It struck the earth with the weight of thunder. The rider turned sharply, gun raised. The ember flared as he drew a breath, and in that flash of light Wade moved. The rifle cracked once, echoes thundered through the hollow town. The cigar fell to the ground, the man with it. The others shouted, rough, broken sounds swallowed by the dark. They fired blindly into the shadows. Wood splintered, dust rose in choking clouds. Wade dragged the girl back toward the rear wall, heart hammering. He fired again, once, twice, just enough to make them hesitate. Then silence returned, broken only by the ringing in his ears. He waited, listened. The footsteps retreated, cautious now, fading into the night. They were not gone, just waiting. The hunt had changed shape. He looked up at the roof's shattered beams. The stars had begun to pierce through, cold and distant. He felt the weight of them pressing down. The desert had no mercy, no memory, but it never forgot its debt. He leaned back, breath ragged. The girl stirred beside him. Her hand, weak and trembling, found his arm. For a moment it was enough to remind him that not all things lost were meant to stay buried. The wind swept through the burned crossing, whispering through ashes, and in its voice he heard the promise of more darkness to come. Night descended like a slow-moving tide, washing the ruins of the burned crossing in blue shadow. The air cooled, but the heat left behind still clung to the stone. A ghost of the day, fire. The desert was never silent, only patient. It whispered through the grass. It shifted through the dust. And it waited for the weary to falter. Wade tightened the straps on the mule's pack, his hands trembling from exhaustion. The animal snorted softly, sensing his urgency. He glanced once more at the bodies left behind in the dust, dark shapes without breath. There was no time to bury them, no time for anything but moving. The girl stirred faintly as he lifted her into the saddle. Her breath rasped, shallow but steady. Her fever had broken under the night's chill, yet her body still burned like a dying coal. He could feel it through the thin blanket he wrapped around her shoulders. The wind rose, cold and relentless, sweeping down the ravine. Sand hissed against rock. A low groan echoed from the canyon. Throat, the kind of sound that came when the desert shifted its weight. Wade pulled his hat low, squinting against the dust, and started toward the trail that wound north through the hollow hills. The hollow trail, a narrow cut between stone ridges, older than any man, carved by storms long forgotten. It was said that those who passed through it carried the echoes of their own sins behind them, that every step was a confession. Wade had no strength left for superstition, but he felt its truth all the same. Each step forward was heavy, the sand dragged at his boots, his shoulders ached beneath the weight of the rifle and the memory of what lay behind. He thought of his daughter again, her small hands clutching his sleeve before the fire took everything. He could still see the glint of that necklace around her neck, bright against the smoke. The same necklace now hung against the girl's chest before him. It caught the starlight as they moved, flashing faintly like a heartbeat. He tried to reason with the thought, to tell himself it was impossible, that life did not loop back on itself in such cruel ways, but the desert had a way of blurring the line between the living and the lost. And in that blur, anything could feel true. The trail narrowed to a ledge. One wrong step, and the drop below would take both horse and rider. He guided the mule carefully, whispering silent reassurances in his mind. The animal trusted him, perhaps more than he trusted himself. Above, the stars shifted in their slow arc. A cold light spilled over the canyon walls, silvering the sand and stone. In that glow, the world seemed both eternal and fragile. Every sound, the scrape of hoof, the whisper of breath, seemed to belong to something older than man. Hours passed without measure. Time became only the rhythm of footsteps and the ache of fatigue. The girl's breathing softened, falling into uneasy sleep. He envied her that small mercy. Far behind, faint and intermittent, came the sound of pursuit, hooves, echoing off stone, the men from the ruins, or others drawn by the shot's echo. The desert carried sound far, but never clear. Wade listened, judged the distance, and pushed forward faster. The trail twisted through a field of broken rock. Jagged outcroppings loomed like teeth in the dark. He could feel the landscape closing in around him, a trap of nature's making. The air grew colder still, and a thin mist began to form between the ridges. It was rare in the desert, that mist, a sign that somewhere, hidden among the stone, water still breathed beneath the ground. He followed its scent, faint, metallic, alive. A shallow creek revealed itself in the moonlight, a ribbon of silver running weakly between the rocks. He knelt beside it, cupped his hands, and drank. The water was cold, biting at his tongue, but clean. He let the mule drink next, then wet a cloth and pressed it to the girl's lips. Her throat moved, instinctively swallowing. It was the first sign of strength he'd seen in hours. For a moment he allowed himself stillness, not rest, just the illusion of it. He watched the current move and thought of how everything in life was drawn forward, whether it wanted to be or not. The creek had no choice, nor did he. Then the sound again. Hooves, closer now, definite. He turned, scanning the dark ridge. There, faint movement against the skyline. 3, maybe 4 riders. They had found the trail, and they were closing the distance fast. His pulse quickened, but his mind stayed cold. He mounted the mule, keeping low. The girl shifted slightly, but did not wake. He urged the animal on, following the creek upstream toward the pass. The path narrowed further, walls rising steep on both sides, forming a corridor of stone. The sound of pursuit faded, swallowed by the twisting turns. Only the drip of water and the wind's sigh remained. Then the canyon opened suddenly, wide and hollow, like a bowl carved by centuries of rain. In its center stood the remains of an old mining outpost, little more than shacks and scattered timbers. Rusting rails cut through the sand, leading to the mouth of a collapsed tunnel. He had reached Hollow Point Mine. He dismounted, scanning the open space. The ground was littered with tools and half-buried bones of wagons. A blackened sign hung crooked near the tunnel, letters nearly erased by time. He could barely make them out. Hollow Trail Company. He led the mule inside the main structure, a storage shed, still standing by some miracle of balance. The roof sagged, but it offered shelter. He set the girl down gently, her breathing steady but shallow. He built no fire. The light would betray them. Instead, he sat in the dark, listening. The wind moved through the open beams, moaning like the voice of the mountain itself. It was a lonely sound, the kind that filled every hollow place in a man's chest. He leaned his head back, eyes on the faint outline of stars through the roof. 15 years of searching, 15 years of guilt, and now a girl with his daughter's necklace lying half dead beside him. The desert gave nothing freely. If it offered this, it meant to take something else in return. A distant rumble rolled through the canyons, thunder, or something that pretended to be. He felt it beneath his feet, deep and slow, like the earth remembering an old wound. The night would not stay quiet. Not for long. He closed his eyes, let the sound wash over him, and whispered a thought to no one, that if redemption truly waited at the end of this hollow road, he hoped he'd recognize it when he saw it. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the taste of rain. The desert had decided to change its skin. The first drop of rain fell like a whisper, soft, uncertain, a sound so faint it could have been imagined, then another, and another, each one striking the roof of the old shed with the quiet insistence of something long denied. Soon the pattern deepened, the low murmur of water meeting dust after months of silence. Wade stirred from half-sleep. For a moment he didn't know if the sound was real. His dreams had been full of rain before, rain that never came. But this was no dream. The smell told him so. Earth, wet sage, rust and renewal. The storm was coming. He rose, stiff and sore, and stepped outside. The world was changing in slow motion. Lightning flickered on the far horizon, outlining the black ribs of the canyon. The air tasted metallic, thick with electricity. Each flash of light carved the night open, revealing the long-deserted mining camp like a photograph left too long in the sun. The wind carried the rain in sudden bursts, stinging, cool, alive. He tilted his face upward, let it run down the lines of his skin, felt the grit wash away. 15 years in the dust, and now the sky wept like something grieving. Behind him the girl stirred. The cold brought colour back to her cheeks, faint but real. He covered her again with the blanket, making sure her breathing stayed steady. She would survive the night if the storm didn't drown them first. The ground had already begun to soften. Water pooled in the old mine tracks, forming thin rivers that ran toward the tunnel mouth. The air echoed with low thunder, not close, but near enough to promise more. He checked the rifle. Only 3 rounds left. He could feel the weight of that truth, like an anchor in his chest. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, sharp and white, lighting up the ridges beyond the camp. And in that flash, he saw them. Figures, far off, near the edge of the ridge, still, watching. He blinked, but the next flash confirmed it. Riders, no more than 5, perhaps 6. They hadn't moved. They didn't need to. They were waiting for the storm to do their work. The thunder rolled, deep and long, then silence again. Only the rain remained. Harder now, filling every gap, every hollow, drumming against the earth with rising urgency. He moved quickly, leading the mule deeper into the mine entrance for shelter. The animal resisted at first. Its instincts fought the dark, but a firm tug and a whisper calmed it. Inside, the air turned cool and damp. The storm's sound dulled, replaced by the echo of water dripping from unseen cracks. He found a lantern among the debris, rusted but usable, and struck a spark. The faint glow revealed the mine's interior. Timber beams warped with age. The ceiling bowed like the ribs of an old ship. The light flickered across markings on the walls, numbers, names, the ghosts of miners long gone. He laid the girl on a bed of cloth and straw near the back. Her pulse was weak but steady. The fever had broken entirely now, replaced by a fragile calm. He envied her peace. The rain intensified, roaring against the world outside. It poured through the canyon like a river freed from its prison. The storm would wash everything clean, the tracks, the blood, the past. But not him. He was carved too deep into the land for that. He sat near the tunnel mouth, lantern beside him, rifle across his knees. Lightning flashed again, brief, fierce. For a heartbeat, he saw the ridge, empty. The riders had vanished from sight, but the silence that followed was not peace. It was waiting, a stillness that hummed with intent. He could almost feel their eyes on him through the curtain of rain. Predators watching from the dark. Men who had learned patience in the same hard way he had. His thoughts drifted again, back to the war, back to the years after. The smell of powder, the weight of command, the faces of those who didn't return. All of it bound to the same unending question. How much loss could a man carry before the desert took what was left? A sudden crack of thunder shook the ground. The mule reared, panicked, and he steadied it quickly, whispering calm into the storm. Rainwater began to pour into the mine entrance, flooding the lowest trenches. The sound grew deafening, 1,000 fists beating the earth. The lantern flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. Its small glow seemed to fight the darkness itself. Wade stared into the black beyond the tunnel's curve. Something moved. A sound too deliberate to be wind. A scrape of metal on stone. Then faint, the creak of a boot sole shifting weight. He froze, held his breath. The storm outside masked everything, but his instincts were older than noise. He knew when something hunted him. He raised the rifle slowly, sighting into the dark. The lantern light trembled across the wall, catching for the briefest moment the edge of a wet footprint. Fresh, they had come through the storm, found the mine. Found him. He backed toward the girl, mind cold, controlled, the rifle steady, every breath timed to the thunder's rhythm. Lightning struck again outside, filling the tunnel with a flash of white light. For an instant, he saw the figure clearly, tall, soaked, face hidden beneath a slick hat brim. Gun drawn, the shot came almost with the same thunderclap. Stone splintered, dust burst in the air. Wade dropped to one knee, fired once in return. The sound tore through the mine like a scream. Silence followed. Only the rain's dull roar outside. He waited, listened. No more movement, just the echo of the shot fading into the storm. Then, another flash of lightning. And the entrance stood empty. The rain poured heavier now, veiling everything in silver mist. Whether he'd hit the man or only driven him back, he couldn't tell. He exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. His arms shook from fatigue. The lantern's flame wavered in the draught, throwing ghost shadows against the walls. The storm howled louder, relentless. He sat beside the girl again, her small frame still beneath the blanket. Outside, the world seemed to be tearing itself apart. Wind, thunder, rain, all of it screaming through the hollow canyon like judgment itself. And beneath it all, he felt something shift within him, a thought, quiet but certain, that the storm was not his enemy. It was his reckoning, a force that would strip away everything false and leave only the truth behind. The rain fell harder still. The mine groaned under its weight, and Wade, soaked in shadow and memory, closed his eyes to the sound, knowing the dawn, when it came, would not bring peace, only another kind of trial. Morning arrived, like a stranger that had lost its way. The rain had spent itself, leaving behind a silence that pressed down from every direction. The canyon lay drowned in grey mist, and the sky above was bruised, heavy with the memory of thunder. Wade stepped out from the mine and felt the weight of wet earth beneath his boots. The world had changed shape overnight. Rivers that had been dust now moved in shallow veins across the stone. Every footprint, every trail had been erased. The desert had written itself clean. He stood for a long while, breathing in the smell of the new morning, mud, ash, and iron. The kind of smell that came after something had burned away. He looked toward the ridge. The bodies, the riders, the threat, all gone. But he knew absence didn't mean safety. It never did. He led the mule from the mouth of the mine. The animal hesitated, ears flicking at the strange sound of water running where none should be. He calmed it with a steady hand and a thought. Easy now, there's more road ahead than behind. The girl remained still in the blanket, her pulse light under his fingers, but steady. He saw that as enough to keep moving. The wind that followed the storm was cold and sharp. It swept across the flats and carried the scent of sage crushed beneath the flood. Far ahead, the land rose again into a stretch of red hills, the place old maps had called the Ash Road, a corridor of rock scarred black by ancient fire. He had avoided it once, long ago, but now it was the only path left unburied by the storm. He started toward it. Each step drew the mud from the ground with a low, sucking sound. The sun broke through in brief flashes, glinting off the standing pools and turning them into shards of glass. He walked until his legs grew numb from the climb. The canyon behind them sank away into fog. Only the echo of water remained. flowing where death had slept for years. The ash road lived up to its name. The earth here was dark, almost charred, and it crumbled beneath his boots like burnt paper. Sparse brush clung to the ridges, thorned, silver-leafed, defiant. Every rock seemed to hum with the heat of some long-ago inferno. He could feel the sun beginning to rise behind the clouds, trying to find its strength again. It painted the horizon with faint gold, weak but persistent. And for a brief moment, the light touched the necklace around the girl's throat. It shimmered, that same shimmer he remembered from years past, and the sight hit him like a bullet to the chest. He stopped walking. The breath left his lungs. That small glint of silver was more than metal. It was memory taking shape. He remembered a hand smaller than his, a voice high with laughter, the sound of bells in summer wind. 15 years gone, and still the ache was fresh. The same necklace, the same design, the mark of his lost child. He told himself again that it couldn't be, that the world wasn't cruel enough to circle back this way. But the thought refused to die. He pressed on, eyes forward. The ash road twisted and narrowed. Birds wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the still air. He caught sight of the storm's damage everywhere, trees uprooted, gullies carved deep, stones split clean in half. The land looked wounded but alive, a mirror of his own soul. By midday, the sun finally broke through the clouds. The heat returned, sudden and merciless. The wet earth steamed, sweat and dust mixed on his skin until every movement burned. He paused in a shallow hollow, letting the mule rest. The girl stirred faintly in the saddle, eyes fluttering beneath her lids. He saw awareness there for the first time, brief like a flame touched by wind, then gone again. It was enough to remind him why he couldn't stop. He tore a strip from his coat, dipped it in one of the rain pools, and placed it against her lips. Her throat moved slowly, accepting the water. Her breathing steadied once more. The wind shifted. Somewhere behind him, a rock slid down a slope. The sound was small, but too sharp to be natural. He turned, scanning the ridges. Nothing moved, only heat and haze. He waited, listening. The wind played tricks with sound, always had. But in that whispering air, he could feel pursuit still alive, distant, relentless, patient as the desert itself. He climbed back into motion. The trail wound upward into pale light. He followed it through the narrow pass until the ground leveled out into a plateau of cracked stone. From there, he could see miles of empty wilderness, mesas rising from the mist like islands in a dead sea. He thought of how many men had come west chasing peace, and how none of them had found it. Peace wasn't something you found in the desert. It was something the desert took from you piece by piece, until all that was left was quiet acceptance. He set camp beneath a lone rock arch, too tired to go farther. The mule lowered its head, content with the last scraps of dry grass. The girl lay still, her chest rising slowly, steadily. Wade sank beside her, every muscle screaming for rest. The sun hung low, painting the horizon with streaks of red and gold. The sky looked like an open wound, beautiful and terrible. He watched it until the colors faded into dusk. When the first stars appeared, he let his thoughts drift. He thought of the road ahead, of what waited beyond the ridges, and of whether redemption could still be found in a land that devoured mercy. He thought of the girl's face, pale and quiet in the fading light, and of the necklace that refused to let him forget. He thought of his own name, how it once meant something and how little it carried now. The wind sighed through the arch above him, cold, endless. It sounded like the voice of the land itself, speaking a truth older than time, that nothing ever really left the desert. It only changed form. Wade closed his eyes and listened until the sound became the rhythm of his own breath. And when sleep finally came, it came not as rest but as surrender, the kind that let a man drift for a while before the next reckoning began. Dawn returned with the pale indifference of a dying ember. The desert stretched wide and soundless, as though the storm had washed away not only dust and tracks, but the very memory of motion. The world was still, too still. Wade woke beneath the stone arch, his back stiff and his mouth dry as old leather. The air was cool, but heavy, with the promise of heat to come. He rose, joints creaking, and stared across the horizon, a horizon that seemed to move backward each time he tried to meet it. The mule shifted near the ashes of the fire, its breath forming faint clouds in the early chill. Beside it, the girl remained wrapped in her blanket, face half lit by the slow arrival of morning. Her pulse was there, her breathing even. Yet her body carried the faint tremor of something deeper, something between survival and surrender. He studied her features in that dim light, searching for traces of memory. The line of the jaw, the shape of the mouth, the faint scar above the brow. Every detail seemed like an echo of another life, one he had buried long ago, but never truly left behind. He turned away. He couldn't look too long, not yet. The trail led east, where the ground broke apart into pale ridges of shale. Old bones littered the flats, scattered ribs of cattle long dead, bleached and polished by wind and sand. Crows picked at the remains, their wings dark and sharp against the empty sky. Their cries echoed through the canyon like the laughter of ghosts. Wade moved among them in silence. Each crunch beneath his boots sounded like a heartbeat fading into dust. He knew this place. Dry creek, a riverbed that hadn't known water in 20 years, maybe more. Once it had been a lifeline for settlers and drifters alike, a place where wagons stopped, where herds drank, where men thought they could outlast the desert. Now it was nothing but a graveyard of their belief. The earth here was white and cracked, splitting in lines that ran like veins across the basin. Shattered wagons lay half-buried in sand, their spokes warped and eaten by rust. Bits of cloth fluttered from dry branches, remnants of tents, maybe flags, maybe the last hopes of those who had passed through. Every object seemed to whisper the same thing. You were here once, and the desert remembers. He led the mule down the slope, careful with each step. The animal's hooves sank slightly into the powdery soil. At the center of the basin, something glimmered faintly in the light. Not water, but metal. He approached and found an old canteen, crushed and half full of sand. The name, etched on its side, had been worn away by time, but the letters that remained, the faint curve of an L, the broken line of an I, twisted something inside him. He brushed the dust away with shaking hands. His breath caught. Lily, or what was left of the word. He froze. The desert held its breath with him. Even the crows went quiet. It wasn't proof. It couldn't be, but it was enough to crack open the walls he'd built. Enough to send old memories rushing back like floodwater through a canyon. He saw again the day she vanished, a field of wildflowers beneath a sky too blue to be trusted. He'd turned away for a moment, just one, and when he turned back, she was gone. Only the necklace had remained, glinting in the dirt. He'd searched until his voice was gone, until his mind broke beneath the sun, and when they told him she'd been taken, he had believed it, because the truth was harder to hold. Now, here, in this dead place, the past had surfaced again, not as memory, but as evidence. He lifted his gaze toward the far end of the basin. A shape stood there, small, still, half buried beneath drifted sand. He approached slowly, the sound of his steps swallowed by the wind. It was an old wagon, the frame mostly gone, the wheels sunk deep. Inside, a pile of wooden crates, tattered cloth and bones, human bones, scattered like pale twigs, one small, one larger. 2 lives ended together. He knelt beside them. The sun climbed higher, throwing light across the scene with cruel clarity. He reached out, brushing the dust away, until the truth revealed itself in fragments. A tiny buckle, a strip of faded ribbon, a child's shoe nearly intact. He sat there, unmoving. Time folded around him. The desert became silent again, as though it too mourned the moment. 15 years of guilt pressed down at once, every night he'd spent blaming himself, every mile he'd ridden trying to forget, every sin he'd used to fill the space her absence had left, all of it gathered here, in the hollow of Dry Creek. He wanted to speak, but words had no shape anymore. They existed only as breath and ache. The wind rose and carried a sound across the basin, faint, like the chime of small metal. He turned toward it. From the saddle, the girl's necklace caught the light again, swinging gently with the wind. A circle of silver, the same circle that had closed once before. The mule shifted uneasily. A tremor passed through the ground, subtle like distant thunder. He listened. Not thunder, hooves. Pursuit had found them again. He stood, his body stiff but steady. The time for memory was over. The living still needed him. He gathered the reins and mounted. The girl stirred, her eyes opening halfway, confusion flickering there like the faint glow of a dying lantern. He steadied her with one hand, turned the mule toward the northern pass, and rode. The first riders appeared on the ridge behind them. Small, dark shapes against the brightening sky. He didn't count them, didn't need to. The number didn't matter. Only distance, only time. The chase began again, this time across the skeleton of a dead river. Each hoofbeat struck the ground like the ticking of a clock running out. He rode without looking back. The desert wind tore at his coat, filled his lungs, stung his eyes. The world blurred into motion, dust, bone, light, and the relentless rhythm of survival. He knew this land would not forgive him. But maybe, just maybe, it would grant him one last chance to finish what fate had begun. And so he rode on, into the glare of the rising sun, chasing the horizon that had always managed to stay just out of reach. The desert changed shape beneath the rising sun. Shadows stretched thin and fled across the flats, leaving nothing but the white glare of day. Every ridge, every stone, every shimmer in the distance became a possible threat. The kind a man could feel long before he could see. Wade pressed the mule harder, guiding it between the tall ribs of rock that marked the edge of Dry Creek Basin. The sound of pursuit was faint now, but constant, a slow, steady rhythm that haunted the wind, the kind of sound that refused to die even when the air went still. He knew that rhythm too well. It was the sound of men who had chosen the hunt over their own humanity. The mule's breath came in short bursts, white against the heat that rose from the earth. Wade leaned forward, feeling the animal's heart pounding beneath the worn leather saddle. Every muscle in his own body burned, but his mind stayed sharp. He had lived through too many chases to believe in mercy. The desert had its own laws, endurance, patience, and silence. He followed them now, as if they were scripture. The canyon narrowed, forcing him to slow. Stone walls closed in on both sides, carved smooth by centuries of wind and forgotten rain. The air grew cooler, shadowed. Above him, thin slivers of sunlight cut through the rock like blades, striking dust motes that drifted like ash. He could hear water trickling somewhere deep within the canyon, faint but real, the last breath of a dying river. He guided the mule toward the sound. The path was jagged, twisting, half swallowed by fallen boulders. Behind him, the echo of hooves grew sharper. They were close enough now to hear, not as distinct shapes, but as pressure, a weight in the chest, a presence on the back of the neck. The girl stirred faintly in the saddle. Her head turned toward the noise, her expression a fog of confusion and fear. Wade steadied her with a firm hand. No words, only intent, only motion. He found the stream at last, a thin ribbon of water winding through the rock. It shimmered like glass beneath the canyon's fractured light. He knelt, filled his palm, and let the water run through his fingers. Cold, clean, real. He let the mule drink, then, with a silent breath, he took one last look behind. The first rider appeared on the far rim, a dark figure cut against the brightness, unmoving, watchful. Then another. Then three more. Shapes without faces, framed by the burning sky. They hadn't seen him yet, not fully, but it wouldn't be long. He had minutes, maybe less. He turned the mule upstream, following the current toward higher ground. The path grew steeper, the stones sharper beneath each step. The canyon twisted back on itself like a serpent, each bend offering both cover and danger. He could feel his pulse matching the rhythm of the mule's hooves. Every breath came measured, controlled, deliberate. He moved like a man who knew every heartbeat mattered. The girl's breathing grew rough, uneven. Her body trembled, then went still again. Her skin was pale as bleached cotton beneath the light. He glanced down, saw the faint movement of her chest, and felt the weight of the choice that kept him riding. This wasn't just rescue anymore, it was reckoning. The canyon opened briefly into a flat shelf, a plateau of broken rock and sparse brush. Wade paused long enough to look east. From there, the desert stretched to the horizon, endless and unkind. Far in the distance, dust clouds rose where the riders advanced. Not many, but enough, always enough. He urged the mule forward. The animal stumbled, caught itself, pressed on. Wade's mind slipped into that familiar rhythm of survival. No thoughts beyond the next step, no emotions beyond the next breath, just endurance. Pure, unbroken endurance. As the trail curved upward, he noticed old tracks cut into the rock. Wagon wheels, long faded, nearly erased by time. They led toward a narrow pass, a gap so small it could swallow a single rider and hide him from the sun. He guided the mule toward it. Inside, the air turned cold again. The canyon's walls rose high, their tops almost touching. Light fell in strips, flickering with every movement above. He could hear the echo of the riders now, closer, louder, more defined. They had entered the canyon behind him. He stopped and listened. The sound came in bursts, one hoofbeat, then two, then silence. They were slowing, searching. They could sense him here, somewhere ahead, but not yet see him. Wade moved the mule carefully along the shadowed wall, keeping to the deepest dark. His boots scraped stone, his breath shallow. He pressed his palm against the canyon wall. Cool, damp, steady. It grounded him, reminded him that the earth had its own kind of mercy, even if it never showed it twice. He found a ledge above the trail, narrow but solid. He guided the mule beneath an overhang, almost invisible from the path below. There, he waited. He could see the dust in the air trembling with each sound that approached. The riders were close now, close enough that he could hear the creak of leather, the jingle of bridles, the low murmur of their breaths. He held still. Every instinct screamed to move, to run, to fight. But the desert had taught him the oldest lesson of all. Sometimes the only weapon left was silence. The first rider passed below, then another. Their shadows crossed the stone like drifting smoke. He counted 5 in total. They moved slow, deliberate, eyes scanning the ground for signs of passage. One paused, turned his head, as if catching a scent on the wind. Wade didn't move, didn't breathe. The man lingered for a heartbeat longer, then spurred his horse forward. The sound faded. The canyon swallowed them whole. Wade waited. Minutes passed like hours. Only when the silence felt real again did he move. He climbed down, guiding the mule in the opposite direction, deeper into the side trails, where even the wind forgot to go. The light dimmed further as the walls closed in once more. A chill crept through the air, carrying with it the scent of old water and stone. Somewhere ahead, the canyon split into 2 paths, one narrow, one wide. He hesitated only a second before taking the narrow one, always the narrow one. It was the harder road, but it was the road that kept you alive. As he disappeared into the twisting passage, the first echoes of pursuit returned faintly behind him. They had realized the mistake. They had turned back. The chase wasn't over. It had only gone quiet long enough to sharpen its teeth. He pressed onward into the dark, following the whisper of wind that promised an exit somewhere beyond sight. And in that moment, as his heartbeat steadied and his breath met the rhythm of the desert again, Wade understood something. He wasn't running anymore. He was being carried by guilt, by purpose, by something larger than his own will. The desert wasn't hunting him. It was guiding him. Darkness gathered in folds as Wade entered the narrow pass. The walls leaned close, their surfaces wet with the slow seep of trapped water. Each droplet fell with the sound of a clock too patient to mark hours. The air was cool now, heavy with the scent of minerals and ancient silence. The heat of the desert vanished behind him like a dream undone by dawn. He guided the mule slowly, letting it find its footing among the slick stones. The girl's body swayed gently with each step, her breathing shallow but steady. She was pale in the dim light, her skin reflecting the faint shimmer of the canyon walls. It made her look almost spectral, as if the desert had shaped her from its own dust and then decided to give her back. The path wound downward, spiraling into shadow. The sound of dripping water grew stronger. It wasn't a stream, not yet, but something older. A whisper of the river that had once carved this place into being. The earth remembered, always, even when men forgot. He reached a ledge and paused. Below him, the canyon floor opened into a hollow chamber of stone, a bowl carved by centuries of hidden current. There, water pooled in a mirror of faint blue, glowing from the trace of daylight that slipped through cracks far above. The sight held him still. It was the closest thing to peace he had seen in years. He climbed down, slow and careful. When his boots met the water's edge, the chill sank deep into his bones. He let it. Pain meant life. It reminded him he was still anchored to this world, no matter how far he'd wandered from its mercy. He knelt, cupped his hands, and drank. The taste was pure stone and cold earth, the kind that woke the spirit instead of dulling it. He let it fill him, then turned to the girl. Her lips were cracked, her breath barely moving. He lifted her gently, tilted the canteen, and let the water touch her mouth. A faint tremor ran through her body, then stillness again. He stayed there a while, letting the quiet settle. The canyon held its breath with him. Somewhere above, the wind moved through unseen cracks, carrying a hollow, flute-like tone. It was the sound of the land remembering itself. A song meant only for those who had stayed too long to leave. As he rested, Wade's thoughts drifted inward, back to the ghosts that had always followed him. He saw Lily again, not as she was when she vanished, but as she had been before the world turned cruel, running through tall grass, hair catching sunlight, laughter carried by the wind. Every image sharp enough to cut through the years. He had chased justice once, then vengeance. Now all that remained was understanding, a need to make sense of the circle he was walking. The canyon seemed to sense it too. Every curve, every drip, every echo spoke of cycles, erosion and rebirth, loss and return. It wasn't a place of death, it was a place of memory, the bones of the earth telling their story through silence. He followed the water deeper. It ran thin now, threading between stones like liquid glass. The walls glistened with veins of quartz, catching what little light remained. He reached out to touch one and felt the cool vibration beneath his fingertips, the hum of something vast and ancient. The passage narrowed again. He had to crouch now, moving carefully so the girl wouldn't strike the rock. The mule hesitated, uncertain, but followed his lead. Every sound, the scrape of boot, the drip of water, the quiet rasp of his breath, merged into a rhythm that filled the silence. It was the rhythm of endurance, the sound of a man walking between past and redemption. He found a small chamber at the end of the tunnel. There the water disappeared into the stone, swallowed by the earth in a smooth spiral. The air shimmered faintly with the moisture rising from below. He lowered the girl to the ground, spreading his coat beneath her. Her skin looked too thin for this world, her pulse faint but still there, fragile like the last flame of a dying candle. He sat beside her, exhaustion settling deep, his eyes closed. In the dark, his thoughts unraveled again. He saw the battlefield, the smoke, the noise, the unending chaos. He saw himself years younger, a man full of pride, believing the gun could balance the scales of justice. He had been wrong. The desert had shown him that. War, loss, guilt, all of it had been part of one endless river. And here, deep beneath the earth, that river still flowed. The sound changed. The soft drip became a pulse, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat echoing through stone. He listened. It wasn't just water anymore. It was the earth breathing, alive, constant, unforgiving. He realized then that this place, this hidden river, was older than any sin he carried, older than his pain, older than his daughter's name. It had watched men live and die, watched their bones turn to dust and their stories fade, yet it kept moving, always moving. He felt a strange peace in that thought. For the first time in years, he didn't feel hunted. He didn't feel lost. He felt present, like the earth itself was asking him to stop running, to listen. He opened his eyes again. The girl's chest rose faintly, her breath steadier now. The necklace at her throat caught the faint glow of quartz and reflected it across the chamber walls. Small sparks of light dancing like stars on the surface of the dark water. He watched them until they faded. Then, with slow and deliberate motion, he rose. The riders would not stop. They never did. But something in him had shifted. He was no longer moving from fear. He was moving toward understanding. The river had spoken, not with words, but with stillness. And in that stillness, he found the courage to keep going. He gathered the reins, lifted the girl once more, and began to climb out of the canyon, following the faint breath of wind that whispered toward the open sky. Behind him, the underground water continued to flow, unseen, eternal, carrying with it the memory of everything the desert refused to forget. The climb took the rest of the day. The walls of the canyon rose like the ribs of some ancient beast, each step upward stealing more of his strength. The air grew hotter, thinner. The blue shimmer of the underground river faded behind him, swallowed by the dark. Ahead waited only light, harsh, unbroken, and merciless. When he finally emerged, the sun was sinking low across the horizon. The world above seemed to burn with color. Gold, red, copper, all shifting and alive. The desert had changed again, as if reborn from the storm. Every stone gleamed with salt. Every ridge shimmered with trapped heat. The silence was absolute. The kind of silence that had a sound of its own. Wade stood still, letting the wind strike his face. It was dry now, carrying dust instead of scent. He breathed it in and felt the desert reclaim him. He had left the world of water behind. Now he was back in the world of fire. The mule stumbled out behind him, eyes dull, flanks streaked with sweat. The girl lay limp in the saddle, her hair tangled, her face ghost white in the fading light. He touched her wrist, faint but steady. That was enough. He scanned the horizon. The land stretched in every direction, a sea of pale dunes and jagged stone. Far to the north, a line of shadow hinted at mountains. He knew those peaks, the distant spine of the Sangre Range. Somewhere beyond them, a settlement. Somewhere beyond them, maybe salvation. Or maybe nothing. It didn't matter. He only needed one more day of strength. He started walking. The ground shimmered with the memory of heat. Each step sent up a fine puff of dust that clung to his boots and skin. The sky bled slowly into violet. Crows drifted high above, silent and watchful, tracing lazy circles against the dying light. The sound of their wings blended with the whisper of sand sliding down the dunes. Everything around him felt alive but distant, as if the world existed yet had forgotten him. As night fell, the desert changed again. the heat left in waves, replaced by a chill sharp enough to bite. He gathered the girl close, wrapping her in the blanket, feeling her warmth against the growing cold. The stars came out, endless, bright, merciless. They filled the sky so completely that the ground below seemed small, unworthy. He looked up at them and felt the weight of every year he'd lost. The desert had always been a mirror. Whatever a man carried inside, it reflected back tenfold. And now, under that vast sky, he saw himself clearly, a man of dust and regret, walking the same circle over and over. He had lost a daughter, lost a wife, lost faith. And yet here he was, still moving, still alive, still haunted by a necklace that refused to let him rest. The wind shifted. It came from the east now, carrying faint sounds that didn't belong to nature. A rhythm of hooves, distant but certain. The riders again. He didn't need to see them to know. Some hungers never stopped following. He pressed on. The terrain leveled into a wide plain of sand, mixed with stone, cracked and pale under the moonlight. He called it in his mind the desert of echoes, for every step he took came back to him delayed, as though the earth itself was answering. Each echo carried weight. Each echo felt like a memory speaking. He began to hear other things too, not sounds of pursuit, sounds from within. A voice that had never left him, the one that spoke when the world went quiet. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was remembrance. The way the human heart repeats the things it cannot forgive. He saw flashes in the moonlight, the curve of a hill that looked like a shoulder, a shadow that resembled a small figure running through the dust. Illusions, he told himself. The desert loved to play with men who hadn't slept, but each time the wind rose, he swore he could hear her laughter, soft, distant, alive. He kept walking. The sound grew clearer, not a voice, but a rhythm, small footsteps beside his own. He turned once, slow, expecting nothing. Behind him, the mule followed, steady and tired. No child, no ghost, only wind. Still, the feeling stayed. That he was not alone. That something walked with him, not in flesh, but in purpose, the kind of company the desert gives to those it has marked as its own. The cold deepened. The moon climbed high, turning the world silver. Each grain of sand caught the light like frost. He could see miles ahead, ridges, canyons, the faint black line of a dry riverbed winding through it all. He aimed toward it. Where there had once been water, there might still be shelter. By midnight the wind grew fierce. It carried whispers now, the kind that slid through cracks and corners, turning memory into sound. He heard his name once. He knew it was a trick of the mind, but it rooted him in place. He closed his eyes. He let the wind pass through him, and when he opened them again, the sound was gone. He found a hollow between two slabs of stone and made camp there. No fire. The riders were too near for light. Only stillness. He lay back against the cold earth, the girl beside him, the stars overhead. The necklace at her throat gleamed faintly with reflected moonlight. He couldn't look away. It glowed like memory, like something that refused to die. He thought of the name that had haunted him, Lily, and of the woman she might have become had the desert not taken her. He wondered if the girl beside him knew the name she carried beneath her silence. He wondered if the universe ever cared about circles closing, or if men simply made meaning where none existed. His thoughts drifted until sleep came, slow, heavy, endless. The kind that feels like surrender, not rest. And as he slept, the desert whispered through the stones, repeating his heartbeat back to him in perfect rhythm, echo after echo, answer after answer, until man and earth sounded the same. The dawn came without color, no warmth, no promise, just a thin grey line stretching across the horizon, the kind of light that barely deserved the name morning. Jackson Wade rose before the sun touched the stones. The cold had crept into his bones during the night, turning movement into labor. When he exhaled, the air turned white. The desert, stripped of its fire, now felt like a corpse. still, pale, and merciless. The girl stirred, wrapped tight in the blanket. Her breath came slow, shallow. He placed a hand near her face, not to wake her, but to feel the pulse of life still moving through her. It steadied him. For one more day, she lived. He stood and scanned the horizon. The wind had died, leaving behind a silence so vast it pressed against the eardrums. And yet beneath it, faint but certain, came a rhythm. The steady, patient beat of hooves, not close, not far, somewhere behind the ridge. He knew that sound better than his own heartbeat. Men who hunted for coin always rode the same way, steady, disciplined, without hurry, a predator's pace, a rhythm that didn't stop until blood was found. He checked the mule's tack. The straps were stiff with frost. He rubbed warmth into the leather, whispering a silent prayer to motion itself. Then he lifted the girl into the saddle. Her head fell against his shoulder. The necklace caught a ray of newborn light, and for an instant the world glowed. He turned west, toward the distant shape of a ravine, a thin scar slicing the land like a wound that refused to close. If he could reach it by midday, he might vanish again. The desert had taught him that survival was not about strength. It was about silence, timing, and the courage to become part of the land's shadow. He moved fast but low, using the rise and fall of the ground to hide his shape. Each ridge became a shield, each hollow a passage. Behind him, the hoofbeats grew louder, still distant, but too constant to be chance. They had found his trail again. He thought of turning to fight. The old soldier's reflex, deep and simple. But the thought passed. The desert didn't reward pride. It rewarded endurance. He descended into a basin where the sand turned to cracked clay. The scent of dust mixed with something faintly metallic, the ghost of old rain. He followed it, guiding the mule through the brittle crust. Every step sounded like glass breaking. He winced at the noise but pressed on. By midday, the grey light sharpened into white glare. The air shimmered with heat again, cruel and deceptive. The line between land and sky blurred until both seemed made of the same pale fire. He could feel the burn on his neck, the sting in his lungs. Every breath tasted of salt and grit. The girl's pulse weakened. He poured the last of the canteen between her lips, watching her swallow in slow reflex. His own tongue felt thick, dry as leather. But thirst didn't matter now, only distance. He pushed harder. The terrain shifted beneath the mule's hooves, softer sand, loose and treacherous. He angled toward a stretch of broken rock where the earth had cracked open like a scar. The ravine was closer than it looked, a dark mouth waiting to swallow what the desert spat out. Behind him the riders came into view, tiny black dots against the white horizon, but moving with purpose. They fanned out in a half-circle, cutting the distance with practiced ease. Wade watched them once, measured their speed, then turned away. He had no breath to waste on fear. He reached the lip of the ravine as the first echo of gunfire cracked through the air. The sound shattered the stillness, sharp, metallic, final. Dust rose in a shimmering wave. A slug tore into the sand near his boot, spraying grit across his face. He ducked low, pulling the mule downward, sliding into the ravine's shadow. The descent was brutal. Jagged stone, loose shale, no sure footing. He half fell, half guided the animal until they reached the bottom. The air down here was cooler, damp with trapped shadow. He crouched against the wall, breathing hard. Above, the riders' voices carried, not words, just commands turned to echo. They were spreading out, circling both ends. He closed his eyes, listened, measured. There, one above the east rim, another moving along the west. Two more holding back, guarding the open plain. They were smart. He needed to be smarter. He studied the terrain. The ravine narrowed ahead, twisting like a vein through the desert. If he followed it far enough, it might spill into another canyon. If luck held, if time allowed. He moved again, silent, using the shadows like armor. Every step echoed faintly, and the sound came back to him a fraction later, that haunting rhythm the desert loved to play. He began to match his heartbeat to it. Step, echo, step, echo. The sound behind him grew fainter. The riders had split too far apart. For a moment it seemed he might slip through again. Then, another crack. Closer. The stone beside him splintered, sharp shards slicing his arm. Pain flared, hot and immediate. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. The ravine opened into a small clearing of white sand, circular, smooth, carved by ages of wind. At its center stood a single dead tree, bleached to bone. He stopped there, chest heaving, realizing the truth too late. The clearing was a trap of silence, every exit visible, every movement exposed. He could not outrun them anymore. He turned back against the tree and waited for the sound to rise again. It did, slowly, relentlessly, until the rhythm filled the canyon. Hooves, leather, metal, death approaching on 4 legs. The girl stirred faintly. Her fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, clutching at it as though in dream. The necklace glimmered once in the sun, and in that small flash of light, something inside him steadied. He was not running anymore. He was returning. The wind picked up again, dry, thin, sharp as broken glass. It carried dust into his eyes, into his mouth, into his wounds. He welcomed it. The desert had taken everything else from him. It could take this too. He knelt beside the mule, hands shaking, eyes lifted to the ridge. The riders appeared one by one, black silhouettes against the glare. Predators closing the circle. He exhaled slowly, letting the air leave his chest like confession. The earth beneath him vibrated with the memory of thunder, and in that trembling silence, Jackson Wade knew. This was the end the desert had promised him all along. Not redemption, not victory, only reckoning. The kind that begins when all running stops. The world held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. Only the faint groan of leather and the rasp of metal broke the stillness. The small, steady sounds of men preparing to end something. Jackson Wade stayed on one knee, his palm pressed against the sand. He could feel the vibration before the riders descended, the tremor of hooves gathering speed, the rhythm of inevitability. The desert was listening. It always listened when men came to settle old debts. He rose slowly, shoulders squared, eyes lifted to the light. The glare off the sand blinded him, turning the riders into silhouettes of darkness and fire, shapes without mercy, shadows with rifles. He did not reach for his gun, not yet. Instead, he stood perfectly still and let the moment stretch, every second an eternity, every heartbeat an echo. The air thickened, heat shimmered around him, warping the edges of sight. It felt as though the world had folded in on itself, sky, earth, and man merging into one blinding pulse. Then came the first shot. It split the silence like lightning. The sound ricocheted through the ravine, multiplied by the stone. He felt the air move beside his cheek, a whisper of death passing close enough to taste. The second shot followed, and the third, each one carving light through the dust. He dropped low, body moving without thought, old instincts taking command. The soldier he had buried long ago rose again, cold, efficient, silent. He rolled toward the fallen stones, using the slope for cover. The mule screamed and fell. The girl tumbled with it, swallowed by the blanket's fold. He reached for her, but the next shot tore into the sand between them, forcing him back. The air filled with grit. Every breath turned to dust. He could no longer see the riders clearly, only flashes of movement, shadows against light. He steadied himself, raised his rifle, and exhaled. One squeeze. A sound like thunder swallowed the canyon. A shape above him folded and dropped from the ridge. Then another. He did not count. There was no room for counting, only rhythm, aim, breath, fire. The desert roared with noise, then fell back into silence. Smoke curled upward, ghostly and thin. He could hear the blood in his ears, pounding like drums from a distant shore. He crawled toward the mule. The animal lay still. The girl, still breathing. He brushed dust from her face, his hand trembling, his lungs burning. The heat had returned, fierce and alive. The sun had climbed higher, reclaiming its dominion. The sand beneath him turned hot again, as if the earth itself demanded payment in pain. A voice rose somewhere on the ridge, not words, only a raw cry of rage. Then another shot. The bullet struck the stone inches from his face, showering him with shards. He ducked, then rolled behind the dead tree. The next shot came from the opposite side. They were circling, waiting for him to break cover. He breathed deep, tasting blood and dust. The air shimmered with heat waves, turning everything into illusion. Time lost meaning. He moved only when instinct ordered. A flicker, a sound, a flash of movement, then another pull of the trigger, another burst of thunder swallowed by the endless sky. When the echoes finally died, he realized how quiet the world had become. No wind, no shouts, no hooves, only the dry rasp of his own breathing. He rose slowly, every bone protesting. His shirt clung to his skin, wet with sweat and blood. He stepped forward into the clearing again. Bodies lay scattered across the rim, black shapes against the pale sand. The sun glared down on them without judgment, only indifference. He lowered the rifle, the weight of it suddenly unbearable, the smell of gunpowder mixed with the copper scent of blood. For a long time he stood without moving, waiting for something, a sign, a feeling, an answer. None came. He turned back to the girl. She was still breathing, her chest rising and falling with stubborn rhythm. He lifted her gently, cradling her against his chest. The blanket fell away, revealing the necklace again, that small familiar chain glinting in the light. He stared at it until the world blurred. 15 years collapsed into one heartbeat. A wave of memory struck him so hard it stole his breath. A small hand holding a wildflower, a laugh echoing down a creek, a voice saying his name like it meant something, and then silence, fire, loss. He felt the weight of all those years pressed down at once, the guilt, the wandering, the endless desert. Every mile of it had led here, to this small patch of dust where memory finally met flesh. He knelt, clutching her tighter. The desert wind rose again, brushing against his face like the touch of a ghost. He didn't know if it was mercy or mockery. He didn't care. He bowed his head and let the moment break him open. For the first time in 15 years, he allowed himself to weep. Not for loss, not for guilt, but for the strange, terrible beauty of being alive when he should not have been. The tears fell into the sand, vanishing instantly, leaving no trace. The desert kept its secrets. It always did. He sat there for a long time, motionless, empty, breathing only because the body still remembered how. Above him, the sky burned white. Around him, silence stretched infinite, and somewhere in that silence, the sound of a heartbeat echoed faintly. Hers, not his. Slow, steady, defiant. He looked down at her again and felt the faintest pull of something he had forgotten long ago. Hope. It was fragile, flickering, but it was there. The kind of hope that survives only in places where everything else has already died. The wind softened. The sun bent lower, its edges bleeding into copper. The desert, once a battlefield of heat and noise, became still again, as if time itself had paused to watch. Jackson Wade sat beneath the bleached tree, the girl resting in his arms. The silence around them was immense, almost holy. He could hear only the slow rhythm of her breath and the faint hum of insects beginning their evening hymn. The light shifted with every passing minute, gilding the sand in gold, then red, then shadow. Each change felt like a chapter closing, each hue a confession. He brushed the dust from her hair, her eyelids fluttered. She was still somewhere between dream and waking, suspended in that fragile space where memory begins to stir. He studied her face, the curve of the jaw, the faint scar above her brow, the dirt clinging to her cheek. Familiar, painfully familiar. He had spent 15 years chasing a ghost, and now the ghost breathed, not in accusation, not in fear, just existence, quiet, raw, real. He did not need words to understand. The desert had given him its language, and it was spoken in silence. He thought of the 3 names that had haunted his journey, the name she carried now, the name the tribe had given her, and the name he had whispered every night into emptiness. Swift River. It was a name of motion, born from the way water moves through stone, carving a path where none existed. The kind of name the land gives to those who belong to it. It spoke of freedom, resilience, and untamed grace. It was her life as it had become, forged by survival, washed clean by storms. Ruth. That was the name carried in the settlements, the one spoken by those who found her and saw not a child of the desert, but a symbol of endurance. Ruth, the faithful, the steady, the one who stays. A name of kindness, patience, and waiting. A name that had learned to live with loss. And then, Lily, the one that lived in his heart. The name of a daughter lost to fire and fate. A name that smelled of springtime and clean water and innocence that could never be returned. 3 names, 3 lives, and somewhere between them, a single truth. He looked at her again, lying there against the blanket, the necklace resting just above her heart. It glowed faintly in the dying light, as if aware of its own story. The charm was worn, edges dulled by years of sand and wind. But the engraving still showed, faint letters, shaped by a father's trembling hands long ago. He traced the curve with one finger. It didn't matter if she remembered. Names were only markers. What mattered was the breath that carried them, the heartbeat that refused to stop. He sat back and let the thought settle. The desert did not care for identity. It cared for endurance. It turned all names to dust eventually, but in doing so, it purified what lay beneath. Essence, spirit, the truth of who someone becomes when all else has been stripped away. She began to stir again. Her fingers twitched. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the fading light. He felt her confusion, the way the mind claws its way out of darkness toward recognition. He did not speak. He only watched. In that silent exchange, something passed between them, a current without words, built from years of longing and loss. She looked at him, not with memory, but with understanding deeper than memory. Recognition beyond reason. He saw it in her eyes, not as knowledge but as knowing, a quiet acknowledgement that life had brought them full circle, father and daughter, not bound by time, but by survival itself. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and dust. The sky deepened to violet. The first star blinked awake. He lowered his head, breathing slow, steady, grounded. No tears now, only acceptance, the kind that comes when a man finally understands that nothing lost was ever truly gone. It only changed its shape. He thought again of those 3 names, each one true, each one incomplete. Swift River, the spirit that endured. Ruth, the soul that forgave. Lily, the child that returned, not as she was, but as she needed to be. He realized then that she carried all of them within her, the river, the faith, the flower. The desert had taken her, reshaped her, and given her back, not as the girl he lost, but as the woman the world needed her to become. He felt peace settle across his shoulders like a blanket. The years of guilt loosened their hold, dissolving into the cooling air. The ache that had ruled his nights finally quieted. Above them, the stars thickened, bright and alive. He watched them spread, each one a tiny ember in the vast black sea. For the first time in 15 years, he felt no urge to move, no restlessness gnawing at his chest. He was where he was meant to be. The girl's breathing steadied. Her hand found his, small and strong. He let it rest there, saying nothing, thinking nothing, just feeling the pulse, hers against his, until the two rhythms blended. The desert night deepened. Coyotes began to call in the far distance, their cries rising like hymns to the moon. The wind brushed across the sand, smoothing away the tracks of battle, erasing the past one breath at a time. He looked once more at the necklace, catching the faint glint of starlight upon it. It shone like a promise kept. A circle closed, and beneath the endless New Mexico sky, Jackson Wade finally understood what it meant to be forgiven. Not by words, but by the simple act of survival. Night claimed the desert in silence. The stars hung low and countless, like 1,000 small fires caught in the endless sky. The moon rose slow, pale and deliberate, pouring its silver light over the broken land. Every ridge, every hollow, every stone shimmered faintly as if waking from a long, hard dream. Jackson Wade sat upon the canyon rim, the girl resting beside him, wrapped in the wool blanket that still smelled faintly of smoke and dust. The wind had softened into a whisper, moving gently through the sagebrush, carrying the sound of distant water, a trickle far below where the rocks gave way to shadow. He listened. Every sound felt sacred now, every breath alive with meaning. The world that had once been a place of punishment had become a place of peace. The desert no longer burned. It breathed. The moonlight spread across the sand like a slow tide, tracing silver veins through the earth. He watched as it reached the fallen tree, the dead mule, the scars of the battle already fading into the dust. The land was claiming what was its own. It always did. He closed his eyes, breathing deep, letting the cool air fill his lungs. Each inhale carried the scent of stone, sage, and distant rain. Each exhale released another memory. Faces, flames, the echo of loss that had followed him for 15 years. One by one, they drifted away like smoke dissolving into wind. The girl stirred beside him. Her heartbeat was steady now, her breathing calm. In the pale glow, she seemed neither child nor woman, but something beyond both, a creature shaped by time, by survival, by the raw mercy of the desert. Her necklace caught the moonlight again, glinting softly against her skin. He watched the faint shimmer and thought of all the roads that had led here, the dust roads, the blood trails, the rivers dry and full, the silence between every gunshot, every prayer. All of it had been one long crossing. And now the journey had found its quiet shore. He thought of the 3 names again, Swift River, Ruth, Lily. He whispered them only in his mind, tasting the rhythm of them like old scripture. Each name had its season, each name had done its work. Now they all belonged to the same silence. He lifted his gaze to the horizon. The land stretched on forever, shadow meeting sky in perfect stillness. There was no destination left to chase, no storm left to outrun, only the slow, eternal breathing of the desert. He felt the weight of his years, not as burden but as proof. Every scar, every mile, every grief had shaped him into something simple, something true. A man who had finally learned the only lesson the frontier ever offered, that peace is not given. It is earned. One loss at a time. The wind brushed his face. He smiled faintly at the touch. It carried no sting now, only coolness, only release. He thought of the life ahead, short perhaps, quiet surely, lived in the shadow of canyons and the glow of the evening star. He would not ride far again. He would build a fire when the nights turned cold. He would wake with the dawn and listen to the land breathe. And maybe, when she was strong enough, she would tell him who she had become in those years apart. Or maybe she would not. It didn't matter. The desert knew her name. That was enough. He looked down once more at the necklace and traced its edge with a thumb roughened by time. The metal was warm from her skin. It pulsed faintly with the rhythm of her heart. He let his hand fall away, content to leave it where it belonged. The moon climbed higher, turning the canyon into a basin of light. Far below, the whisper of water deepened, a reminder that even here, in the heart of desolation, something still moved, still lived, still renewed itself. He lay back against the stone, feeling the cool surface cradle his spine. Above him, the stars turned in their ancient silence, patient and eternal. He felt himself become small beneath them, smaller than he had ever been, and freer than he had ever imagined. The girl shifted closer in her sleep, the faint sound of her breathing blending with the desert's own. Together, they formed a single rhythm, man, child, land, united not by blood or fate, but by endurance. He let his eyes close. The wind moved again, soft, endless, tender. It swept across the sand, erasing footprints, carrying dust into the starlight. And in that moment, with the moon above and the canyon below, Jackson Wade understood that nothing in this world is ever truly lost. It only changes form, like water finding its way through stone, like a river becoming dust, then rain again. The desert sighed once, long and low, as if exhaling its final story. Then all was still. Only moonlight remained, endless, silver and kind. The moon hung low over the canyon. The fire was down to embers. The wind whispered through the sage, carrying the last breath of the story into the dark. Jackson Wade rested, his journey done, his ghosts finally quiet. And somewhere beyond the ridge, the desert waited for another rider. If you've come this far, stranger, stay a while. More tales ride these trails, and the desert still has stories to tell. Like if this one touched your soul, subscribe to Ride Again Beneath the Western Sky. Comment where you're watching from, Cowboy, so the campfire knows your name.